All right, so in the fourth or fifth attempt at this video, we're going to be looking at rig controls. Rig controls are a fundamental thing for animating because they make, quite frankly, your animation possible. The notion of rig controls is to have these NURB shapes that we can select without having to go in and select the joints. If we were to try to select the joints on this model, you can see that most of them are inside the figure and we can't actually click on them. Yes, we could go through our outliner, but you don't always want to have to go to your outliner. If you can, you want to be able to go to your figure itself. Yes, we could work in wireframe mode, but the problem with wireframe mode is it's really hard to see what's going on and if there's collisions and things like that going on. We want to be able to look at ours in this surface view and we want to be able to click things on the screen. Controls allow us to do that. Controls are set up as having parent constraints and other type of constraints to various aspects of the jointing system, and the surface is skin to the jointing system, so that I can do something like select my foot control here, move it, and I'm moving the whole foot. So I'm moving the IK without ever having to click on the IK. The other advantage is I can add in special things like being able to rotate the direction of this knee that I wouldn't be able to normally do because it requires controlling very specific parts of the IK handle. So the control system is about having things we can click on to move and animate our figure. So we can make all of that animation happen without ever touching the joints after our rigging stage. So let's look through here at our basic character. So I have a very, very bare bones basic set of jointing going on. This is sort of the minimum amount you're going to need for your project. I have my hip as my root. It's going down into my legs, all the way down to having a single ball joint. This would be a great opportunity to doing a reverse foot rig. If you do a reverse foot rig, you don't need any controls for it because it's over in our channel box. If you don't do a reverse foot rig, you're going to need to add in a control for that ball of that foot. From our hips, we go up all the way to the tippy top of the head. And from our chest, we go out. Now, I only have one joint here. You certainly, for the same level of complexity, could have two joints where you go up for the collarbone and then over to the shoulder. In this case, I just happen to only have one going over to the shoulder. It's going out to the wrist. And I have a basic Muppet hand situation going on here where all of the fingers but the thumb are controlled from a series of rigs here, and the thumb is controlled from another. I'm not going to be putting in controls for the fingers in this video, although of course you can and should if you expect those to be animated. Likewise, you could do some IK things like in the reverse foot rig in the hand if you wanted it to be extra complex. There's more things that could be added into this or done. At a bare level of controls, I need a root control. It moves around the whole figure. I need a foot control and a knee control. I need a waist control, which is going to control my rotation of the figure independently of the foot and bending. I need a spine control. I only have two spine joints. I only have one neck joint. Again, more in there is going to give you more flexibility, more level of control. It will increase your complexity grade. This is sort of the bare minimum of what you've got going on. You could also do a spline IK, something we haven't covered yet, in there if you wanted to increase that. Chest control, same thing, rotation of the chest. Wrists are just like the arms. We have a wrist control to control the movement of that IK, and an elbow control to control that placement, and then I've got a head control up top. So this is sort of the basic level of controls and rigs that you would need for your character. You can increase complexity with a reverse foot rig, with IKs in the hand or controls in the hand, or independently rigging all of the fingers. You can increase it with extra spine pieces, extra neck pieces, things like that also. A lot of this will depend on the complexity you feel comfortable creating, but also what your character needs going forward and what you need to make sure you know going into the final project. So let's walk through how on earth we do this. So this is a basic character with the rig going on. I actually haven't even skinned this yet, so we're just going to hide that skin for a brief moment so you can see the rig structure going on, and I've got my IKs in place. So our very first step is to go through and create our controls. Now, this is done with curves and surfaces NURBs. We talked about these when we talked about paths. really, really brief refresher. Be prepared to ask questions if you need. We can create basic shapes up here in the corner under our curves/surfaces. Honestly, you can do everything with circles. Click it to create it, then scale it and move it just like any other object in Maya. If you don't want to draw anything, just use circles. It's a nice, solid, singular shape. It's really stable for this. You can use circles and ovals. If you want to get more fancy, though, you can use your EP curve tool or your pencil curve tool to draw more complex shapes if you want to draw more complex shapes. I'm not requiring anything over more advanced than circles, but you can do that. So I'm going to start with the root, work my way up, and then deal with the limbs. I want to do this from the front view so I can make sure I'm positioning everything and then refine it from the side view. If we're not positioned right at this stage, when you parent and constrain things together, it's going to cause issues. I'm going to take that very first circle I created, hit Control D to duplicate it, and then I'm just going to move it and scale as appropriate. So I'm going to move my second one up to be the waist. I'm going to duplicate that up to be the spine. And again, I could have multiple spine controls in here. I'm going to duplicate that now to be the chest. And one last time, I'm going to duplicate that to be the tippy top of the head. That takes care of all of my trunks and my root control. I'm now going to go through and do my feet. Getting back here just so I can make sure to line up the feet. I'm going to duplicate that circle again. I'm going to scale it in. And to make it look just a little bit better, I'm also going to make it be an oval before I line it up with the foot. Now with our feet, we want to go into the top view to see how we're lining this up and try to get the best lineup possible. I'm going a little bit rough at this stage because I know I can refine it again later. Duplicate that thing for the foot. So I've got my feet in place. I now need to do my knees. Again, I'm just going to duplicate that first root. And now I need to rotate it. I'm going to be rotating it 90 degrees in the X, so it's facing forward. Looking back in my front view here, I'm going to be scaling it up. Scaling it down, moving it up, moving it over. So I have one knee, two knee. I can duplicate both of these to move up so I can put my wrists in place. So I can have, my elbows in place, one elbow, two elbow. My wrist is going to have to rotate again. So it's going to need 90 degrees in the Y so I can position it in the wrists. And then just duplicate that very last one. So at this point, after I have them roughly in place, I'm going to go through and do a few things. One, I need to check them from my side view because there's no guarantee they're in place in my side view. And you can actually see that. We can't see my elbows at all in the side view or the top view. They're run off to be floating in a weird space. So you really want to double check all of your placement. You want it as accurate as possible at this point and as even as possible at this point. You may also want to go and do things where on the feet or the wrists, you rotate them so they're in place. So take a moment here to pause the video if you need to, go through and check on the front, on the top view, on our side view, that we're as lined up as possible. Mine's going to stay a little bit rough potentially, just so we can keep moving on, especially since this video keeps eating itself. But you're going to want to make sure that they're lined up at this stage because there's no going back once we start parenting and constraining them. So at least make sure everything has a nice level of visibility from all of the views, especially double check those knees and those wrists. Okay, when you are happy with that, I would highly recommend you go ahead and increment and save if you haven't done that already. So that if anything goes wrong, as it certainly can at this stage, you have that happily. Because the next set of stages that we're going to be doing is doing parenting and doing constraints. So we really need to make sure everything's good at that point. So we need to make sure that if we move our root, all of these follow along. So we're going to be setting up a parenting structure for knees to follow feet, for elbows to follow wrists, for all of the trunk to follow the root, etc. So remember, it's child, then parent. So before we do any of that, we need to make sure we go through and name things so we know what we're selecting. The very bottom one is the root. The one at the waist is, lo and behold, the waist. Then we go up to spine. If you have multiples of these, you can name them spine 1, spine 2, or spine up or spine lower, whatever makes sense for you. Going up into the chest and then to the top of the head. Your feet, you're going to want to make sure that we know which one's left or right. You are welcome to name them as either left foot or feet or foot first. It's up to you. I kind of like saying the type of body part and then if it's left or right, but there's nothing wrong with saying left or right and prioritizing what side of the body you're on. I'm not going to grade you on specific names on your project, other than I need to be able to make sure it makes sense. So don't name them anything weird, but specific naming structure is up to you. If you want, you can also put the word control or a letter C on this so you know they're not your controls and not your joints without having to look at the little symbols. Again, I want you to name these things that you're comfortable with you, as long as, again, a general other human is going to be able to understand what's going on with them. So, once you've named everything, again, doesn't hurt to give this an increment and save at this point. But now we're going to start our parenting structure. Remember, with a parenting structure, it is selecting the child, then the parent, and hitting the letter P. So I'm going to select the elbow, control select the wrist, hit the letter P. I find this easier to do in the outliner because I know I'm clicking exactly what I want and I'm clicking it on the first try. So again, select the knee, then select the corresponding foot, hit the letter P. Knee, foot, P. So that has parented all of the wrists and elbows to their appropriate hand. Now you need to think about the way this body is moving. If I move the head, does anything else move? No. If I move the chest, should anything else move? Well, yeah, if you move your chest, your elbows and your hands have to move along with it. It's a requirement of that motion. So, I parented the wrists backwards. This is what happens when I'm talking and not listening. So, we're going to have to go through... No, I did that right. I'm just being extra special. Goodness gracious, brain. So what you're going to go through and do is put those all together. So again, here's an accidental repeat. I'm going to have to go through and select my knees and parent them to my feet and select my wrists and parent them to my hand. So you should have foot, foot, wrist, wrist. Now we're going to have to parent the wrists and our head to our chest. If I tilt and rotate my chest and I'm not controlling my other body points, by default, the hands and the head go along. So select your wrists, your head, select the chest left, hit P. If I move the chest, everything else should go along with it. You can always test this. Just make sure you Command Z so they're back in place. Now we're working our way down the trunk. So, if I move the spine, my chest has to move. So select the chest, then the spine, hit P. If I move my waist, the rest of my upper body has to move. Select the spine, then the waist, hit P. Now our last thing is to decide how we want to do the feet. In general, we want the feet to stay stable without our waist being moved. So if we're moving our waist and rotating our waist, we want our feet to stay in place. Some people may choose to have the feet animate with the waist, but the way we're doing it is having the feet animate with the root. So all of these last three things, the 2 feet and the waist, are going to move with the root. So select all of those, select the root last, hit the letter P. The structure you should end up with, and again, remember your naming system may be different than mine. The structure you should end up with is basically this. We want all of these things to move down their way to be nested through. So if you need to pause it and make sure your structure matches mine, it's not a bad thing to do right now. Okay, again, increment and save. It's a good place. Now we know if I move my root, I'm going to be moving the rest of this through with it. And everything's going to be happy. What we need to set up now is our parenting constraints. So this was just straight up parenting letter P. What we're going to need to set up some constraints. So make sure you're in the rigging tab so we can get to our constraints. We have options about how we go through and constrain things. We could constrain them by very specific things of just constraining the ability to orient, or just constraining the points, or constraining them outright with the parents. But what we're actually going to be clicking on is the rig. So I'm going to hide my body. I just made it into its own layer so I could easily show and hide it. So I can select the rig to move these various things and move these various places around. So much like we have things happening through on here, we want our joints to be happy. Now, ideally, you would have gone through and named your joints. Apparently, previous me who set up this file did not name their previous joints, but we can go through and put those in and make that happen. So what we want to be doing is deciding which joint is going to be controlled by what control and locking them through in the appropriate way with the appropriate constraint. So this is where you need to be careful about your order of operations. What we just did of setting up our joint chain here, our control chain here was done through straight up parenting. We selected the child, then the parent, then hit the letter P. What we have to be going through here is doing it the other way of selecting the parent, then the child, and setting up our constraint. Apparently, my IKs aren't named easier, just so that you guys can see what's going to go on here. I'm going to go through and name at least one set of my IKs. Okay. So, what we're going to be doing with the constraints is using a few different kind of constraints. Under our constraint tab, the one we've used previously is parenting. Parenting is full-on control. It controls its orientation, its rotation, its translation, all of those things like that. We can also just give it control of rotation by doing orient only. And we're going to be using a fancy one to control which way our IK is pointing to move the knee and elbow, which is the pull vector. Let's start off with the root and our most basic type of control and go from there. So what we're going to be wanting to make sure to do is that we always select the parent first and then the child. If you're having trouble clicking here, go into your outliner and doing it. I want my root control to move the whole rig. The whole rig is based around the root joint, which is my hips. So I'm going to select the root control, select the hips, and go to constrain parent, because I want it to move everything, the rotation, the translation, all of it. I can check that by clicking on that root control. Everything should change colors, and I should be able to move it to move that. So now my root is moving everything. And because all of the other controls are parented to the root, they all move along. And in the future, anything they control will move along with them too. But I also have something else called hips here as far as the control. We're going to actually double constrain that hip joint so that the root moves everything, but we can still rotate the hips independently. You could also choose to move this control up one and have a one barely over the hip and have a second placement. That's another valid way to do it. But I'm going to select the hip control. I'm going to select the hips itself, and I'm going to, again, constrain parent because I want to be able to shift those hips around and move them. So now I can move things around a little bit more within that. You know what? I'm going to back us up real quickly. I forgot a step that will make sure things stay cleaner. So I'm going to reopen up my increment real quickly. Apologies for this. This is why you incremented save. Yep. Okay. Before I do anything, I want to make sure and go through and that all of my controls here, I want to reset their position so that this is the 0 position. Because if I go back, I want to be able to make sure that what I do selects everything at 0. So I want my standard position to be 0. And right now, all of these have translations because I went through and translated them. And I don't want to keep those translations in there. So I want to make sure to take all of my controls and go in to clean those out. Oops, can't do them all at once. Sorry, go through and clean those out. So I want to select my object. And as you can see in my attribute editor, I have a translation and scale and things like that. And I want to go to modify freeze transformation so it all zeroes out. So do go through and make sure that you're making all of those happen and that you're freezing all of those transformations first so that we know that everything is set down to our 0 point. So go and do that a change real quickly. All right, sorry about that misstep. So now I've cleared out everything. I know that they're all cleared out because everything's set to 0 in the value. I knew that was wrong because I saw some additional shifting when I moved things around that I didn't want. Now that those are zeroed out, we're going to go through and constrain them. So select the parent. I'm going to start with my root. Select the hips. I'm going to constrain parent. I'm then going to select my hip controller. Select through the hips, constrain parent. Again, this is the bare bones way of doing it. A slightly cleaner way of doing this is to go through and have one joint just slightly higher than the hips. That's going to be this movement. Now, our next level of doing the spine, we can choose a different type of constraint. So I selected the spine rig control, selected the joint that represents the spine. We can just do constrain orient because all we need to do within this is to be able to rotate it. We don't need to be able to translate it or anything else. Now, when you're going through and doing this, technically we can still move the spine space and everything doesn't move with it because we told it, no, it can't translate because that part of the spine can only rotate. You're going to want to make sure that you go into all of your constraints, like this one who's only supposed to be rotating, and lock the attributes it can't do. So lock that translate so there's no way for me to shift it up. So again, the spine, I selected the spine joint. I did constrain orient, and then I'm going to go into that rig control and lock the translate. Same, our chest can technically move over without moving our hips and our spine. You could just orient constrain this, although we can technically move it. It depends on the nuance of your animation. So either one works here. I'm just going to go with constrain parent. Working on through that, and then likewise in the head. Now the head is interesting because we're actually selecting the neck, even though it's the control floating on top of the head. So select that neck joint, select up into the head. Within there, this one again, we're technically only a rotation, so we could go in and do constrain orient, and we could lock the translation. So you can see, going back to what we talked about locking things in previous talks, we can go through and we can lock these various aspects to really make sure that they're working for us. And the idea should be, if you rotate that lower point, we should really see everything moving along with it and only moving what we want. It's always good to check those, because I just did my neck in the wrong way. Select the control, then the appropriate place. So we want to be able to go through and do those. So moving them around is a really good thing to do. We can also always check it by looking in the attribute editor. If there's a series of attributes turned blue, it means it's being constrained somewhere else. So we've worked our way all the way up the trunk. Now we have to deal with the legs and the arms. The legs and the arms are going to be controlling the IKs, not the joints. So I'm going to select my left wrist handle here. I am then going to select... Oh, yeah, these didn't get renamed because I resaved the program. I'm going to figure out which one is the left wrist. So I'm going to select my left wrist control, my left wrist IK, and I'm going to go constrain parent. You want to check that that works, and if you move that, your IK handle should be moving. The elbow is the weird one, though. Our elbow is not going to be a parent constraint or a orient constraint. It's going to be the pole vector. The pole vector is which way an IK handle is pointing. So the pole vector is this little white line right there. That's our pole vector. And what we want to be able to do is rotate the way that pole vector is moving based on where our elbow is facing so we can do all those nice bends of the arm and the leg we have. So in this case, I am selecting my elbow. I am once again selecting the wrist IK, but I'm going to constrain pole vector. And you'll see this extra line appears drawing itself from the IK to the elbow. The elbow now changes which way the IK is facing, so you can really do a lot of great nuances as soon as you're controlling that pole vector. Let's do that once again here in the leg. I'm going to select the foot. I'm going to select the appropriate IK handle, and I'm going to constrain parent. I am then going to go and select the knee, select the appropriate IK handle, and do constrain pole vector. This will allow me to choose which way the knee is pointing, and I have a real nuance of animation. So by going through and making these changes happen, by going through and doing these modifications, I can really make sure that everything's going to be moving around appropriately. And again, I can go in this and test things, like rotating things and seeing how things shift around. All right, so I just went through and did the other twos real quickly off screen. But what you should have happening here is that I can move the root around and everything moves with it. I can move the foot and the leg moves with it. And I can rotate the way that knee is facing with my knee result. My waist will still move the waist as a whole. My spine I can't move, but I can rotate. I can rotate my chest and all the hand pieces move around. And if I move my hand, I can move that hand, and I can move how that elbow is facing with the elbow control. The point of this, again, is that once we turn on something like the skin and we get everything skinned together, we don't have to look at the joints and move those joints. It gives us an easy way to go through and control it. It is a process where the exact steps you take matter. As you saw, I parented, constrained the head wrong at the one point. So I'd highly recommend you incrementing and saving a lot more than I incremented and saving. Because this is a nice step-by-step that you'll be able to use to go through and do on your project as need be. Do bear in mind, again, these are the bare bone basics and for the basic level grade on your rigging. If you want a more advanced level rigging grade, you're going to need to be able to go in and do things with the hand. You're going to consider adding additional things for the spine or additional things for the neck and such, not like that. I know Easter gets in the way because of the fact we lost 2 weeks during a break, so there will be a few more supplemental things potentially coming. If nothing else, a run through of the project for you, although the check-in is currently live, so please keep an eye out for those. I'll be sure to send the announcement it's through. But when you're going through and doing these controls, start with the book exercise, use this as a supplement, and make sure that you're taking these slowly step by step and incrementing and saving as you go, with the ideal goal being that we can move one part of an object by using the controls, animate through that, and not have to ever touch and mess with the joints. Because as soon as you're touching and messing with the joints, one, you have to see through your figure, and two, things can go really wrong. So make sure you understand parenting. Make sure you understand the difference between parenting and constrained parenting or parent constraints. Make sure you understand what we did with orient and pole vector. Make sure you know how to make NURBS. And if you don't, this week, get with me during those office hours. I have them on Thursday and Friday where you can tune in and I can go over things as a video as need be. Good luck.